Joining me right now is one of my favorite people, John Ashbrook from the Ruthless Podcast. And I got to tell you, John, I watched y'all on YouTube for the first time last week's episodes, and it is a much different experience.
Well, thanks for watching, Martha. What did you think? Did you like YouTube better or you like podcast better?
I like YouTube better, but so much I'm doing this in the car. I'm listening in the car because, I live in the Southeast. I drive, I'm in my car a lot. So generally I don't have an hour and a half to sit in front of YouTube. But I actually projected, I cast it on my screen. My husband watched it with me. It became like an event. It was great.
Well, thanks for watching. We're going to put our backs into the next episode knowing that you're tuning in.
Well, it's so funny because my husband is a primary care physician who really didn't care much about politics. That's why our relationship worked so well until ACA passed. And now I have to deal with a political husband, but it's all right. It works out okay. It's like, this isn't what I signed up for, but it's okay. So it's good.
Well, ACA got a lot of people upset, also known as Obamacare, of course. It really animated the majority of the country in a way that we just hadn't seen in politics up to that point.
No, absolutely.
And it's still sticking around, unfortunately.
Unfortunately. Now, we got a couple of topics to get to today. Of course, there was new polling this week that, just continues to show that unless we really screw things up, the polling is in Republicans' favor, that the president's doing poorly in every way. And this messaging he's doing coming out of this border stuff is just perplexing to me. What do you think?
Well, I think that he's made a messy border situation unconscionably worse. 8.5 million people have come into this country illegally since he was sworn in as president, and 8.5 million, just to put that in perspective, that's the sum of the population of all 5 boroughs in New York City. That is a lot of people, and it's not just families from Guatemala. There are fighting age men from Yemen and China and from continents across the world who are somehow getting to South America and walking across the border. Anybody who is following this issue is surely familiar with a guy named Bill Malugin, who reports for Fox News, and he's been stationed there at Eagle Pass along the Texas border for, a couple of years. And if you're not following him on Twitter, I'd just say to folks listening, if you're not following him on Twitter, definitely check him out, because he has hard data and hard information that you really don't find in a lot of other outlets. And the most troubling thing about this, Martha, is just the way that the Biden administration doesn't want to do anything about it. They're perfectly content with letting another 3.5 million people into the country this year, which we're on pace to do, 300,000 people a month. That's kind of the average right now. And he could sign 3 pieces of paper tomorrow and cut the flow dramatically, but he simply will not do it. There's a lot of news this week about an effort in Congress to try to force his hand a little bit, and some people were unhappy with what turned up as a Senate border deal. This was written by a guy named James Lankford, who's a senator out of Oklahoma, in negotiation with Democrats, who of course are in the majority in the Senate. So it's not, Republicans were never going to get what they wanted out of the package that he offered. But when the details started to emerge on Sunday night, people noticed big problems with the negotiated bill that he presented. And unfortunately, they decided to just scrap it all together rather than try to put it on the floor and amend it and remove provisions that were unsatisfactory. Of course, we're never going to get everything we want when Democrats are in charge, but something to slow the flow at the border between now and the day that President Trump is sworn in next January, I think would be a good thing. So, I unfortunately, I think we're just stuck with Biden and his recalcitrance on the issue.
Yeah, and it's.
I was
listening to Barry Weiss's podcast, honestly, and they had some defense contractor folks on, and they were talking about how the biggest mistake we're making is we are conflating border security with immigration policy. And we do look at it hand in hand, but border security is actually a national security issue. And immigration policy is all the other stuff that goes with who comes into the country. And I thought that was a really interesting way to look at it, because it does make more sense. Now, they're inextricably linked at this point in time. But, I'm on this panel with Democrats and Republicans on a television show I do called The Georgia Gang. And I said to my Democratic colleague, I said, under President Obama and under President Trump, we had the same laws as Joe Biden has, and they did a much better job. I mean, in fact, Obama was called the deporter in chief. He didn't talk about immigration much, but he was not, he wasn't as good as Trump was, but it wasn't as bad. They looked at it as a crisis in the Obama administration if there were 1,000 people coming across the border illegally. So how did Biden get to be this come one, come all guy? I just don't know.
Well, it's hard to explain. Some people point to the very beginning of his administration when you remember he signed these orders to undo all of the protections that Trump put into place. A lot of people point to Elizabeth Warren staffers who were hired into his administration on day one, and they had this issue in their sights, and they wanted to cut the border in the worst way. So I mean that's one explanation I've heard, but regardless of who in the administration's idea it was, it's an awful problem for our country, and it's only getting worse. And I think that it's potentially going to be the biggest issue on the ballot this fall.
So let's talk about this fall. We had this weird Nevada primary caucus thing that is happening, that it looks like the former president's going to win. They're casting it as a loss for Nikki Haley, but she didn't really try there. I mean, granted, she needs to have some wins. The numbers are getting better in South Carolina, but they're not getting as good as they need to. So I think she stays in through Super Tuesday, and I wouldn't be surprised if she had the funding that she tries to make some kind of run all the way to the convention. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, she is raising a lot of money, and so if she marshals the resources well, she could stay in through Super Tuesday. Of course, it's difficult to play in every single state with limited resources, and I wouldn't be shocked. I don't think it should shock anybody that she would want to stay in at least through her home state in South Carolina. But the Nevada results are interesting. Of course, the caucus today is going to be for Trump because he's the only participant. I think Ron DeSantis was originally in that, but now is he's not running. So, but what was interesting was the result Tuesday in the Nevada primary. So I think you probably explained this, but Nevada has both a primary and a caucus. The caucus is the only system in Nevada that awards delegates to the Republican convention. The primary is something that the state set up to try to transition away from a caucus. They've not fully transitioned. So the primary that they had this year that took place on Tuesday had basically every candidate but Trump and on the ballot, listed on the ballot. And Nikki Haley finished in second place, second to none of these candidates.
I know.
And she finished like double digits behind that. And what I think is so interesting about that, because if you talk to the Trump campaign, they were not organized in that state. They weren't campaigning on the primary. It wasn't even on the ballot. What was interesting to me is that people organically voted for none of these because they didn't see Trump's name and they just were voting for Trump. And the reason why that should be encouraging to Republicans is because it demonstrates a level of energy behind Trump that he had maybe going into 16, maybe going into 20. So if he is the nominee, that base of support that he earned before is just as energized to turn out and vote for him again.
Because honestly, I mean, we established in the 2021 runoff in Georgia that Republicans will stay home if they're mad, okay? There were about 440,000 Republicans that stayed home, and we would have won both of those seats had they turned out. And I think that the Biden, not doing the Super Bowl interview, calling everything MAGA, whatever, he's just trying to make his base mad so that they will turn out because he wants to suppress Republican votes. I think he knows that if Republicans and moderates and center-leaning lefties who look like they might be considering somebody besides Joe Biden from the polling, he wants people to be depressed and not come out to vote. So I want encouraged voters. That's what I want.
Well, but I think you're exactly right, and I think that they're crossing their fingers that there was news yesterday that Chris Christie may be interested in pursuing a third-party ticket. There's all these rumors that Joe Manchin, the Democrat senator from West Virginia, might be interested in pursuing a third-party run with the no labels ticket. You've got RFK out there. I think Democrats, just like you said, I think they're crossing their fingers that they can have some of these third-party alternatives on the ballot that gives a landing spot for voters who maybe were super pumped about Ron DeSantis, Nikki Haley, and didn't get the candidate of their choice, and they want to cast a protest. So that could be. Look, I think that this election cycle is going to be different than any we've ever seen since Ross Perot in 1992, and it's going to be. I mean, from a spectator standpoint, it's fun to watch, but terrifying with the thought that Joe Biden might get another 4 years to leave the border open and ruin our economy further.
Yeah, I'm kind of a history geek, and I've been digging into the 5 elections in our history that have had more than 2 candidates in them. There haven't been that many of them where they've had, I mean, there are individual states from time to time that have more candidates, but as far as actual election results where maybe electoral votes were given to other people besides the main parties, there's only been about 5 of those. And you're right, 92 was the last time there was anybody of any subsequence, of any substance. So it'll be interesting to watch. You're right. But I got to tell you, I still just, I want to get my head around the fact that I just don't think 2 80-year-olds are the best we can do. It looks like that's what we're going to have.
I mean, that puts you squarely in the majority. I don't think anybody has had a conversation about this race and not said some version of the fact that in a country of 330 million people, how is it that we're getting a rematch here? And there's a high level of dissatisfaction with the choices. And I think that's probably what these third party, I know that's what they're using as their appeal to raise money, the third party candidates or the potential candidates and the no labels and everything like that. But it's, for Republicans and people who want to shut down the border, it's a scary prospect.
Absolutely. John Ashbrook, if you go to Ruthless Podcast, you can find it at all the podcast streaming. They love you to go to their YouTube channel because you can get visuals when you do that. So we appreciate you being with us and always being available. Thanks for being here.